she was beaten and abandoned to die, until a lone cowboy found her and swore she'd never be hurt again. The blood trail led him straight to her broken body lying face down in the dirt beside the dried creek bed. Jake Monroe pulled his horse to a hard stop and swung down from the saddle before the animal even settled. The woman's dress was torn to shreds, her back covered in welts and cuts that made his stomach turn. She wasn't moving. He dropped to his knees beside her and pressed 2 fingers against her neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. Jake carefully rolled her over and sucked in a breath. Her face was swollen beyond recognition, one eye completely shut, lips split and crusted with dried blood. Whoever did this wanted her dead. The woman's good eye flickered open for just a second. She tried to speak, but only managed a weak gasp before passing out again. Jake didn't waste time. He scooped her up as gently as he could and laid her across his saddle. She weighed almost nothing. He mounted up behind her, keeping one arm locked around her waist to hold her steady. His ranch was 8 miles north. Too far. The old Henderson place was closer, abandoned for 2 years now, but the well still worked. He checked it last month. Jake kicked his horse into a gallop, ignoring the woman's soft moans every time the animal's hooves hit the ground too hard. The Henderson cabin appeared over the ridge just as the sun started its descent. Jake pulled up to the porch and carried the woman inside. Dust covered everything, but the back room had an old bed frame with a straw mattress that looked halfway decent. He laid her down and ran back outside to grab his canteen and saddlebags. Water first. He trickled some between her cracked lips and she coughed, sputtering weakly. Good. Her body was still fighting. Jake pulled out his spare shirt and tore it into strips, soaking them in water from the well. He worked carefully, cleaning the blood and dirt from her wounds. Some of the cuts were deep. Too deep. She needed a doctor, but the nearest one was in Copper Falls, 20 miles east. She wouldn't survive the ride. Jake clenched his jaw and kept working. He'd patched up plenty of ranch hands and even stitched up his own leg once after a bad fall. This was different, though. Whoever beat this woman had done it with rage, with the intent to destroy. As he cleaned the wound on her shoulder, he noticed bruises in the shape of fingers around her throat. Someone had tried to strangle her. Jake felt rage building in his chest like a fire catching dry wood. He forced himself to breathe slowly and focus on the task. By the time he finished cleaning her wounds, night had fallen completely. Jake lit the oil lamp he found in the kitchen and brought it to the bedroom. In the better light, he could see she was younger than he first thought. Maybe 25. Her hair was dark brown, matted with blood and dirt. He covered her with his bedroll and sat down in the corner chair. His rifle lay across his lap. Whoever did this might come looking to finish the job. Jake wasn't going to let that happen. He'd found her. That made her his responsibility now. The woman didn't wake up through the night. Her breathing stayed shallow but steady. Every hour, Jake checked her pulse and gave her small sips of water. As dawn broke through the dirty windows, her good eye opened again. This time it stayed open. She stared at him for a long moment, fear flooding her features. Jake raised both hands slowly and stayed in his chair. He kept his voice low and calm. You're safe. Nobody's going to hurt you. I'm Jake. Found you yesterday by Miller Creek. The woman's eye darted around the room, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings. She tried to sit up and immediately gasped in pain, falling back against the mattress. Don't move, Jake said. You're pretty beat up. Need to stay still and let yourself heal. She opened her mouth, and a rough whisper came out. They'll come back. Who? The gang. They'll find me. Jake stood up and walked to the window, keeping his back to her so she wouldn't see the anger on his face. A gang. Not just one man. That explained the severity of her injuries. Multiple attackers. How many, he asked. 5. Maybe 6. I lost count. He turned back to face her. They have names? She closed her eye and a tear slid down her bruised cheek. Carl's the leader. The others just follow him. They took everything from the stagecoach, shot the driver and the guard, left them in the canyon. A stagecoach robbery. That meant this woman had been a passenger. Wrong place, wrong time. Except they'd let her live long enough to beat her half to death and dump her body in the wilderness. Why didn't they just shoot you? Jake asked, then immediately regretted the bluntness of the question. The woman's eye opened again and looked straight at him. Carl wanted to. The others talked him out of it. Said a bullet was too good for me. I fought back, you see. Broke one of their noses. They didn't like that. Despite everything, Jake felt a flicker of respect. This woman had spirit. She'd fought men who outweighed her, outnumbered her, and still managed to hurt one of them. That took guts. "What's your name?" he asked. Claire Dawson." "Well, Claire Dawson, you're going to be okay. I promise you that. And when you're strong enough to ride, we're going to Copper Falls. You're going to tell the sheriff everything you know about Carl and his gang." Claire's expression shifted to something close to despair. "The sheriff won't help. Carl pays him off. Everyone knows it." Jake absorbed this information without changing his expression. A corrupt sheriff complicated things, but it didn't change his mind. He'd made a promise when he pulled Claire's broken body onto his horse. She'd never be hurt again. Not while he was breathing. The morning sun climbed higher, and Jake went outside to tend to his horse and scout the area. No fresh tracks besides his own. The gang probably thought Claire was dead by now. Let them think that. It gave them time. He came back inside with his saddlebags and pulled out some dried meat and hardtack. Not much, but it was food. Claire managed to eat a little, though chewing clearly caused her pain. She kept watching him with that one good eye, studying him like she was trying to figure out if she could trust him. Jake understood. She'd been brutalized by men. Why should she trust another one? He'd have to prove himself through actions, not words. 2 days passed in the abandoned cabin. Claire's fever broke on the second night, and some of the swelling in her face went down. She could open both eyes now, though one was still ringed with deep purple bruises. Jake had ridden back to his ranch under cover of darkness and brought back medical supplies, food, and blankets. Claire watched him change the dressing on her wounds. Her voice was stronger now, but still carried the rasp of someone who'd been choked nearly to death. "Why are you helping me?" Jake didn't look up from his work. "Because you needed help. Most men would have just ridden past. Not most men." She was quiet for a moment. "Carl and his gang, they'll kill you if they find out you helped me. They can try." Claire grabbed his wrist, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I'm serious, Jake. These men are animals. They'll torture you just for fun. You should take me to the next town and leave me there. Forget you ever saw me." Jake gently removed her hand from his wrist and went back to wrapping the bandage. "Not going to happen, Claire. I found you. That means I'm responsible for keeping you safe until you can keep yourself safe. That's how it works." "That's not how anything works. You don't owe me anything." "Maybe not, but I gave you my word you'd never be hurt again." "I keep my word." She stared at him for a long time, something shifting in her expression. Maybe it was hope, maybe it was just exhaustion. Either way, she didn't argue anymore. On the third day, Claire was strong enough to stand and walk a few steps. Her ribs were still badly bruised and every movement caused her pain, but the determination in her eyes told Jake she'd push through it. She was a survivor. That afternoon, as Jake was chopping wood outside, he heard the distant sound of horses, multiple horses. He dropped the axe and ran inside, grabbing his rifle. "Get in the back room and stay quiet," he told Claire. Her face went pale. "They found us. Don't know yet. Could be anyone, but I'm not taking chances." Jake positioned himself by the front window where he had a clear view of the approaching riders, 5 men on horseback moving at a steady pace. They weren't in a hurry, which meant they probably weren't tracking Claire specifically, but that didn't mean they weren't dangerous. As they got closer, Jake could make out details. Rough-looking men with guns on their hips and rifles in their saddle holsters. A big man with a thick black beard and a scar running down the left side of his face. He matched Claire's description of Carl. The gang had come to the Henderson place. Whether they were looking for Claire or just using it as a waypoint, it didn't matter. Jake had about 60 seconds before they reached the cabin. He made a choice. Hiding would just delay the inevitable. Better to face the now on his own terms. He stepped out onto the porch with his rifle held loosely in both hands, not pointing at anyone.
"Not yet."
The 5 riders pulled up about 20 feet from the cabin. Carl looked at Jake with cold, calculating eyes. "Cabin's supposed to be abandoned," Carl said. "Was," Jake replied. "I'm using it now." "That so? You alone?" "That's my business." Carl smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "See, here's the thing, friend. We use this cabin sometimes when we're passing through. Kind of our place, if you catch my meaning. I don't see your name on it." One of the other men, younger, with nervous eyes, spoke up. "Carl, maybe we should just—" "Shut up, Danny," Carl cut him off. His eyes never left Jake. "You got a name, friend?"
"Jake Monroe."
"Monroe. That name sounds familiar. You own a ranch north of here?" "I do." Carl nodded slowly. "Heard about you." "Heard you keep to yourself. Don't cause trouble." "That true? Generally?" "Good. Then you won't mind clearing out and letting us use the cabin for a few days. We got business in the area. Jake felt the weight of his rifle in his hands. 5 against 1, not great odds. But he had position and surprise if it came to shooting. More importantly, he had something worth fighting for in that back room. Can't do that, Jake said. The smile dropped from Carl's face. Can't or won't? Both. The tension ratcheted up instantly. The other 4 men tensed in their saddles, hands drifting toward their weapons. Carl held up one hand, stopping them. Now why would you want to make this difficult, Monroe? We're reasonable men. We can pay you for the inconvenience. Say $50 for you to ride out of here for a week. Not about money. Then what's it about? Jake shifted his weight slightly, a subtle movement that brought the rifle up just an inch. It's about me giving my word to protect something, and I don't break my word. Understanding dawned in Carl's eyes. You found her. You found that little wildcat from the stagecoach? Don't know what you're talking about. Carl laughed a harsh sound. Sure you don't. Danny, you remember her? The one who broke your nose? The young man called Danny touched his face instinctively. His nose was swollen and sat crooked on his face. I remember. She was a fighter, that one, Carl continued, talking to Jake like they were old friends. Janeway had to teach her a lesson. But you know how it is. Can't let people think they can fight back against us. Bad for business. Jake's finger moved to the trigger of his rifle. You should ride on. Not without finishing what we started. See, we left her out there to die, but if she's alive, well, that's a loose end. Carl doesn't leave loose ends. You're not getting her. Carl sighed dramatically. Monroe, you seem like a decent guy. But you're making a very stupid choice here. Give us the girl and ride away. You can keep your life, your ranch, everything. Otherwise, the rifle came up smoothly and Jake had it pointed at Carl's chest before the man could finish his sentence. Otherwise what? Jake asked quietly. The 4 other men drew their weapons, but Jake kept his aim steady on Carl. Mexican standoff. If shooting started, Carl would die first. The gang leader knew it. Jake could see the calculation happening behind those cold eyes. You'd die for some woman you don't even know? Carl asked. If that's what it takes. You're a fool, Monroe. Been called worse. They stared at each other for a long moment. Then Carl did something unexpected. He started laughing. Real laughter, like Jake had told the funniest joke he'd ever heard. Boys, put your guns away, Carl said, still chuckling. Mr. Monroe here is a man of principle. I can respect that, even if I think it's going to get him killed. The gang members looked confused, but slowly holstered their weapons. Jake kept his rifle up. Here's what's going to happen, Carl said, his voice turning serious again. We're going to ride out of here. We'll give you a day's head start. One day. Then we're coming back, and we're going to burn this cabin to the ground with anyone inside it. You want to save that girl? Get her out of here and run as far as you can, because come tomorrow night, there won't be anywhere in this territory you can hide. Why give me the day? Carl shrugged. Like I said, I respect a man with principles. Doesn't mean I won't kill you, just means I'll give you a sporting chance. More than we gave her. With that, Carl turned his horse, and the gang rode off, heading west. Jake watched them until they disappeared over the ridge. His hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. He just faced down 5 killers and somehow walked away. He went back inside. Claire was standing in the doorway of the back room, her face ashen. You should have given me to them, she whispered. Not going to happen. Jake, you heard what he said. They'll come back. They'll kill both of us. Then we'd better be gone before they do. Claire shook her head. You don't understand. Carl doesn't make idle threats. He'll hunt us down. He has friends in every town between here and Colorado. There's nowhere to run. Jake set his rifle down and looked at her directly. Then we don't run. We fight. Fight? How? It's just you and me against his entire gang plus whoever he has on his payroll. You said the sheriff in Copper Falls is corrupt. What about other towns? Other lawmen? Claire thought for a moment. There's a U.S. marshal named Helen Grant. She's based out of Silver Ridge, about 40 miles south. Be honest. Tough as nails. But getting to her means riding right through Carl's territory. Then that's what we do. You're insane. Jake picked up his rifle and started checking the ammunition. Maybe, but I made you a promise, Claire. You're never getting hurt again. Not by Carl, not by anyone. So we ride to Silver Ridge. We find this marshal, and we make sure Carl and his gang answer for what they did. Claire stared at him like he'd grown a second head. Why? Why are you doing this? You could just leave me here and ride back to your ranch. Pretend you never saw me." Jake paused in his reloading and met her eyes. "My sister was killed by men like Carl 3 years ago. Gang of outlaws attacked our family ranch while I was in town getting supplies. By the time I got back, they'd burned the house and killed everyone inside. My parents. My sister Lucy. She was 16 years old." Claire's expression softened with understanding and sympathy. "I hunted those men for 2 years," Jake continued. "Tracked down every single one of them. Brought them to justice. Some went to trial. Some didn't give me the choice. But I made sure they paid for what they did. When I found you in that creek bed, beaten and left for dead, all I could see was Lucy. I couldn't save her. But I can save you." Tears welled up in Claire's eyes. "I'm sorry about your sister. But her death taught me something. Sometimes you can't just walk away. Sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even when the odds are against you. Especially then." Claire wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders despite the obvious pain it caused her. "We fight, but we do it smart. Carl's not the only one who knows this territory. I used to work as a scout for wagon trains before I took that stagecoach. I know trails that'll get us to Silver Ridge without using the main roads." Jake felt a surge of hope. "How long if we push hard and don't stop except to rest the horses?" 2 days. Maybe 3 if we have to hide from patrols. We leave tonight, soon as it's full dark." They spent the rest of the day preparing. Jake rode back to his ranch one more time and gathered supplies, ammunition, and his second horse. Claire was strong enough to ride if they took it slow. Her wounds were healing, but she'd be in pain for weeks yet. As the sun set, they mounted up and headed south. Jake led the way, with Claire riding beside him. Every shadow made him tense, every sound put his hand on his gun. But the night stayed quiet. They rode through the darkness, following game trails and dry riverbeds that kept them off the main paths. Claire's knowledge of the land proved invaluable. She guided them through narrow canyons and over rocky ridges that would hide their tracks. By dawn, they'd covered nearly 15 miles. Jake called a halt in a sheltered grove of cottonwood trees near a spring. They let the horses drink and rest while they ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack. Claire looked exhausted but determined. The swelling in her face had gone down significantly, and she could move without gasping in pain every few seconds. She was tougher than she looked. "How much further to Silver Ridge?" Jake asked. 25 miles, give or take? There's a trading post about halfway, run by a man named Pete Carson. He's trustworthy. We can rest there for a few hours and get fresh water." "Carl know about this trading post?" "Everyone knows about it, but Pete doesn't take sides. He serves whoever has money, no questions asked. As long as we keep our heads down, we should be fine." They rested for 2 hours, then mounted up again. The morning sun climbed higher and the temperature rose. This was harsh country, all scrub brush and red rocks with mountains looming in the distance, beautiful in its own way but unforgiving. Around noon, they spotted smoke on the horizon. Claire tensed immediately. "That's coming from where Pete's trading post should be," she said. Jake felt his stomach sink. They pushed the horses faster, cresting a ridge that overlooked the trading post. Or what was left of it. The main building was burning, black smoke pouring into the clear sky. Bodies lay in the dirt. "Carl," Claire whispered. Jake pulled out his spyglass and scanned the area. 5 horses tied up near what remained of the corral. The gang was still there. He could see men moving around, looting what hadn't burned. "We have to go around," Claire said. "If they see us, they already know we're coming this way. Carl's not stupid. He figured we'd head for the nearest lawman, and he knows this is the route we'd take. He's not just burning the trading post." "What message?" "What message?" "That nowhere is safe. That he'll kill anyone who helps us." Jake collapsed the spyglass and put it away. "We can't go around. The detour would add a day to our journey, and we don't have the supplies. We have to go through." "Through, Jake? There's 5 of them?" "I know. But we have the element of surprise. They think we'll run. We won't." Jake outlined his plan quickly. It was risky, bordering on suicidal, but it might work. Claire argued at first, but eventually agreed. They had no other choice. They left the horses hidden in a ravine and moved forward on foot, using the terrain for cover. Jake carried his rifle and his pistol. Claire had insisted on taking his spare revolver despite her injuries.
She knew how to shoot. That helped.
They got within 100 yards of the trading post before Jake found the position he wanted. A tumble of boulders that gave him a clear line of sight and good cover. He had Claire stay low while he set up. Through his rifle scope, he could see the gang members clearly now. Carl was inside the burning building, probably looking for valuables. The other 4 were outside. Danny was tending the horses. 2 men Jake didn't recognize were going through the bodies of the trading post's inhabitants, stealing whatever they could find. The 4th man stood guard, but he was watching the road, not the surrounding hills. Jake took a deep breath and sighted on the guard. His finger touched the trigger. One squeeze and a man would die. He'd done this before during his hunt for his family's killers. It never got easier. He thought about Lucy, about Claire, about Pete Carson and whoever else Carl had murdered at the trading post. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked and the guard dropped instantly. Jake was already working the bolt, chambering another round. The 2 looters looked up in confusion, trying to figure out where the shot came from. Jake fired twice more. Both men went down. Danny abandoned the horses and ran for cover, pulling his pistol. Carl burst out of the burning building, gun in hand, eyes scanning the hills. He was shouting something, but Jake couldn't hear it over the ringing in his ears from the gunshots. "Carl knows where we are now," Claire said, pointing. The gang leader was directing Danny to flank around through a gully that would bring them up on Jake's position from the side. Smart. Jake had maybe 2 minutes before they got in range. "We need to move," he said. They scrambled down from the boulders and ran in a crouch toward a dry creek bed 30 yards away. Bullets kicked up dirt behind them. Carl had spotted their movement and was firing, but the range was too far for accurate pistol work. Jake and Claire slid into the creek bed and ran along it, using its depth for cover. Behind them they could hear Carl shouting orders. The hunt was on. The creek bed curved around a bend and Jake pulled up short. Ahead of them it opened into flat ground with no cover for 100 yards. They'd be exposed. Behind them, Carl and Danny were getting closer. "We're trapped," Claire gasped, breathing hard. Jake looked around frantically. Then he saw it. A narrow gap in the rock wall of the creek bed, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through. "There. Go." Claire didn't hesitate. She pushed through the gap and Jake followed, his shoulders scraping against the rock. They emerged on the other side into a small canyon he hadn't known existed. A hidden passage. "This way," Claire said, taking the lead. She moved with purpose despite her injuries. This canyon connects to the main road about a mile south. "If we're fast, we can get back to the horses before they find this gap." They ran. Jake's lungs burned and his legs ached, but he kept pace with Claire. Behind them, they heard Carl's voice echoing through the rocks, distorted and angry. He'd found the gap. The canyon wound between tall rock walls that blocked out most of the sunlight. Claire navigated it like she'd been here before, taking turns without hesitation. Maybe she had? She'd said she worked as a scout. They burst out of the canyon's far end and nearly ran straight into their horses. Claire had judged the distance perfectly. They mounted up and kicked the animals into a gallop, heading south toward Silver Ridge. Gunshots rang out behind them. Carl and Danny had made it through the canyon. But they were on foot and Jake and Claire had a lead. The horses ate up the distance, hooves pounding against the hard-packed earth. They rode hard for an hour before Jake called a halt to rest the horses. They were both breathing heavily, covered in sweat and dust. Claire's face was pale with pain, but she hadn't complained once. "That was incredible back there," Jake said. "How did you know about that canyon?" "I didn't. I was guessing." "We got lucky." "Some guess." Claire managed a weak smile. "I'm a good guesser." They remounted and continued at a steadier pace. The sun was starting its descent toward the horizon. They needed to reach Silver Ridge before nightfall. Carl had more men, more resources. He could send riders ahead to cut them off if they didn't move fast. As evening approached, they spotted buildings in the distance. Silver Ridge. The town was bigger than Jake expected, maybe 500 people. It had a proper main street with shops and a church. Most importantly, it had a law office with a U.S. Marshal seal on the door. They rode straight to the office and dismounted. Jake had to help Claire down. Her strength was flagging. She'd pushed herself too hard. Inside, a woman in her 40s sat behind a desk, cleaning a rifle. She had steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that evaluated them in an instant. The marshal's badge on her chest caught the lamplight. "Marshal Grant?" Jake asked. "It's me. You two look like you've had a rough day." "Rough week," Claire said. "Marshal, we need your help. There's a gang operating in this territory. Leader's name is Carl. They robbed a stagecoach, murdered the driver and guard, and tried to kill me. Today they burned down Pete Carson's trading post. We have to stop them." Marshal Grant set down her rifle and leaned back in her chair. "I know about Carl. Been trying to catch him for 2 years. He's slippery, always has alibis, always has witnesses who swear he was somewhere else when crimes were committed. He's paying people off," Claire said, "including the sheriff in Copper Falls. I know that too. But knowing and proving are 2 different things. You got evidence?" Jake stepped forward. We have Claire's testimony. She witnessed the stagecoach robbery and murder. She can identify all the gang members. One witness against 5 men. Their lawyer would tear her apart in court, especially looking at her like that. The marshal's eyes took in Claire's bruised face and obvious injuries. Jury would think she got beat up by someone else, maybe over some personal matter. Carl would walk. So what do we do? Jake asked, frustration building. Marshal Grant stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the darkening street. We set a trap. Carl's coming here, isn't he? That's why you ran straight to my office instead of hiding. You want him caught. He said he'd hunt us down, Claire confirmed. He'll come to Silver Ridge. Good. Then we'll be ready for him. The marshal turned back to face them. But I need you both to do exactly what I say. No heroics. No trying to settle scores on your own. We do this by the book so it sticks in court. Understood? Jake and Claire both nodded. Marshal Grant smiled grimly. All right, then. Let's catch ourselves a gang of killers. She laid out her plan. It was simple, but effective. Claire would stay in the marshal's office where she'd be safe and visible through the front window. Jake would hide on the roof of the general store across the street with his rifle. Marshal Grant would be inside her office but out of sight. When Carl showed up looking for Claire, the marshal would arrest him. If he resisted or if his gang tried to interfere, Jake would have them covered from above. Other townsfolk loyal to the marshal would be positioned around the street as backup. He'll come tonight, Claire said with certainty. Carl doesn't wait. He'll want to finish this before we can organize a proper defense. Let him come, Marshal Grant said. I've been waiting a long time to put that man behind bars. They spent the next hour preparing. Jake took his position on the roof, finding a spot behind the false front where he had a clear view of the street but wouldn't be visible from below. His rifle was loaded and ready. He had extra ammunition in his pockets. The town settled into evening quiet. Lamps were lit in windows. A few people walked the streets, but they quickly cleared out as word spread that trouble was coming. The marshal had warned them. Jake waited. The air grew cooler and stars began appearing in the darkening sky. He kept his eyes on the road leading into town from the north. That's where they'd come from. An hour after full dark, he spotted them. 6 riders this time. Carl had picked up another man somewhere. They rode into Silver Ridge bold as you please, like they owned the place. Maybe they thought they did. The gang tied their horses in front of the saloon, and Carl led them toward the marshal's office. He'd spotted Claire in the window. Jake could see the cruel smile on the gang leader's face even from this distance. Carl knocked on the marshal's door. Not polite, pounding. Marshal Grant opened it and stepped out onto the porch. Help you gentlemen with something? We're here for the girl, Carl said. She's a thief. Stole from us.
We're taking her back. Is that so?
You have proof of these charges? Don't need proof. I'm telling you she's a thief. Well, that's interesting because she's telling me you're a murderer. Says you robbed a stagecoach and killed 2 men. Says you and your friends beat her and left her for dead. Which story should I believe? Carl's hand moved toward his gun. I don't care what you believe, Marshal. We're taking the girl. You can step aside or you can get hurt. Your choice. I choose option 3, Marshal Grant said, and her own gun appeared in her hand with shocking speed. You're all under arrest for murder, robbery, and assault. Drop your weapons. For a second, nobody moved. Then Carl laughed. You think you can arrest all 6 of us? You're one woman. She's not alone, Jake called out from the rooftop, his rifle aimed at Carl's chest. Carl looked up, surprise flickering across his face. Then Danny pulled his gun and all hell broke loose. Jake fired first, hitting Danny in the shoulder and spinning him around. Marshal Grant shot the man next to Carl, dropping him instantly. The other gang members scattered, drawing their weapons and looking for cover. Bullets flew. Jake worked his rifle, firing and chambering new rounds with practiced efficiency. He hit another gang member in the leg. Below, Marshal Grant had taken cover behind a water trough and was trading shots with Carl. 2 of the gang members made a break for their horses. Armed townspeople emerged from the shadows and cut them off. There was more shooting. 1 gang member went down, the other threw up his hands in surrender. That left Carl, Danny, and 1 other man. They'd taken cover behind a wagon and were pinned down. Carl was shouting something, but Jake couldn't make it out over the gunfire. Give it up, Carl, Marshal Grant called out. It's over! Carl's response was to fire blindly around the wagon. His bullet shattered the marshal's office window. Claire screamed inside. Jake felt cold rage wash over him. He adjusted his aim and fired. The bullet punched through the wagon's wooden side and Carl cried out. Not a killing shot, but it had hit him somewhere. I'm hit! Carl shouted to his remaining men. Fall back! The two men helped Carl to his feet and they stumbled toward the alley between the saloon and the barber shop. Marshal Grant started to follow, but Jake called out a warning. "It's a trap. That alley's a dead end." The marshal stopped. A second later, gunfire erupted from the alley and bullets tore through the space where she would have been if she'd pursued. Carl had been hoping to lure her into an ambush. "Smart," the marshal muttered. She raised her voice. "You're trapped, Carl. That alley has no exit. Come out with your hands up." Silence from the alley. Then Carl's voice, weaker now but still defiant. "Come and get me, Marshal." Jake climbed down from the roof and joined Marshal Grant in the street. The captured gang members were being secured by townspeople. Danny sat in the dirt, clutching his wounded shoulder and looking terrified. "What's the play?" Jake asked the marshal. "We wait. He's bleeding. He'll either come out or die in that alley. Either way, this ends tonight." But Jake had a different idea. "There's a back way into that alley, through the barber shop. I could circle around, come at him from behind. Too dangerous. No more dangerous than letting them sit there and think of a way out." Marshal Grant studied him for a moment. "You military?" "Was long time ago." "It shows." She nodded. "Okay. But you take 2 of my deputies with you. And Monroe? Try not to get yourself killed. That girl in my office would be upset." Jake managed a slight smile despite the situation. He gathered 2 armed townspeople who Marshal Grant deputized on the spot and led them around to the barber shop's back entrance. The door was unlocked. They moved through the dark shop quietly, Jake in the lead with his rifle ready. Through the shop's back door he could see into the alley. Carl and his 2 men were crouched behind some crates about 15 feet away. Carl was pressing a hand to his side where Jake's bullet had hit him. Blood darkened his shirt. Jake stepped into the alley and cleared his throat. Carl spun around, bringing his gun up. But he was slow, weakened by blood loss. Jake had his rifle pointed at the gang leader's head. "Drop it, Carl." For a moment, the outlaw leader looked like he might try anyway. Then his gun clattered to the ground. His 2 men followed suit, raising their hands. "It's over," Jake said. Carl laughed bitterly. "Over? Boy, this ain't over. I got friends. I got money. I'll be out of jail in a month. Maybe. But Claire will still be alive. And you'll know that you failed. You tried to kill her, and you couldn't. She survived. She won. You lost." Something ugly twisted Carl's face. That little... Jake stepped forward and drove the butt of his rifle into Carl's stomach. The outlaw doubled over, gasping. "Watch your mouth when you talk about her," Jake said quietly. The deputies moved in and secured Carl and his men. They hauled them out of the alley and into the street where Marshal Grant was waiting. A crowd had gathered now, townspeople emerging to see the captured gang. Claire stood on the marshal's office porch, one hand gripping the doorframe for support. When she saw Carl in chains, something in her posture relaxed. Relief. Maybe even closure? Jake walked over to her. "It's done. He can't hurt you anymore." Claire nodded, unable to speak. Tears ran down her bruised cheeks, but she was smiling. Actually smiling. Marshal Grant joined them. "We'll need formal statements from both of you tomorrow. Tonight, get some rest. Doc Martin's office is 2 doors down. He'll want to look at those injuries properly, Miss Dawson." "Thank you, Marshal," Claire managed to say. "Thank me by testifying when this goes to trial. We're going to make sure Carl and his whole gang hang for what they did." The doctor examined Claire and confirmed what Jake had already figured out. Cracked ribs, extensive bruising, some deep cuts that would scar but would heal clean. She was lucky to be alive. The doctor gave her laudanum for the pain and told her to rest for at least a week. Marshal Grant arranged for Claire to stay in a room above the general store. Jake helped her up the stairs and made sure she was settled before heading back down. "Where are you going?" Claire asked. "Getting a room at the boarding house. Need to see about our horses, too. Jake, wait." She caught his hand. "I never properly thanked you for saving my life. For keeping your promise. You could have died today, but I didn't. You know what I mean." She squeezed his hand. "I was ready to give up when you found me. Ready to just let go and die. But you wouldn't let me. You made me want to live again. You showed me that there are still good men in this world." Jake felt uncomfortable with the gratitude, but also touched by it. "You would have done the same for me." "I don't know if I would have. I'm not as brave as you. You broke a man's nose while 5 others were beating you. You're plenty brave, Claire." She smiled at that. "Get some rest, Jake. We'll talk more tomorrow." Jake left her there and walked back out into the night. The streets of Silver Ridge were quiet again. Carl and his gang were locked up in the marshal's jail. The doctor was tending to the wounded. Everything had worked out. So why did Jake feel so empty? He knew why. Because the fight was over, but the problem remained. There would always be men like Carl, always be people who hurt others for profit or pleasure. Jake couldn't stop them all. He couldn't save everyone, but he'd saved Claire. And maybe that was enough. He found the boarding house and paid for a room. The bed was lumpy and the room smelled like old tobacco, but it beat sleeping on the ground. Jake lay down without bothering to take off his boots. He'd sleep light tonight, just in case. Old habits from his army days. 3 days passed before Claire was strong enough to travel. During that time, Marshal Grant took their full statements and built a case against Carl that would stand up in any court. The gang leader had stopped talking, probably on advice from whatever lawyer he'd managed to hire, but the evidence was overwhelming. Jake visited Claire each day, bringing her meals and keeping her company. They talked about everything and nothing. She told him about growing up in Boston, about coming west to escape a controlling father, about the freedom she'd found working as a scout. He told her about his ranch, about his plans to expand it, about the quiet life he'd built for himself after tracking down his family's killers. On the 4th day, they rode out of Silver Ridge together. Claire insisted she was well enough to travel, and the doctor reluctantly agreed. Marshal Grant watched them leave from her office porch. "You two take care of each other," she called out. They waved and headed north, toward Jake's ranch. Claire had nowhere else to go. The stagecoach company she'd been traveling with had moved on, assuming she was dead. Her belongings were lost or stolen. She had nothing but the borrowed clothes on her back and a horse Jake had bought for her. The ride took 2 days. They camped one night under the stars, sharing Jake's bedroll for warmth. Nothing improper happened. Claire was still healing, and Jake was too much of a gentleman anyway, but there was an intimacy in the silence they shared, watching the fire burn down to embers. Jake's ranch appeared over a ridge late on the second afternoon. It wasn't much. A modest house, a barn, corrals for the horses, and a few 100 acres of decent grazing land. But it was his, and he'd built it with his own hands. "It's beautiful," Claire said. "It's home." They stabled the horses, and Jake showed Claire to the guest room. It had a real bed, with clean sheets and a window that looked out over the valley. Claire stood at that window for a long time, just looking. "I could stay here," she said quietly, "if you needed help with the ranch. I'm a hard worker. I can cook, mend clothes, handle horses. I wouldn't be a burden." Jake leaned against the doorframe. "You could stay even if you weren't useful. You're welcome here as long as you want, Claire." She turned to face him. "Why? We barely know each other. I know enough. You're tough. You're brave."
You don't give up even when things are bad.
"Those are qualities I respect." "Is that all?" There was something in her voice. Hope, maybe. Or fear. Jake met her eyes. "No, but it's enough for now. Deal. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Claire smiled. It was the first real, unguarded smile he'd seen from her. It changed her whole face, made her beautiful despite the fading bruises. "Okay," she said. "We'll figure it out." The weeks that followed fell into a rhythm. Claire regained her strength slowly but steadily. She helped around the ranch. At first just light tasks, but gradually taking on more. She was good with the horses and had a way with the ranch hands Jake hired during busy seasons. Word got around about what happened in Silver Ridge. Some people looked at Jake like a hero. Others thought he was a fool for risking his life over a stranger. Jake didn't care much either way. He'd done what he thought was right. Carl and his gang went to trial in late summer. Marshal Grant brought Claire and Jake to testify. The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for less than an hour. Guilty on all counts. Carl and 3 of his men were sentenced to hang. The others got prison time. Claire watched the verdict being read with no expression on her face. Later, outside the courthouse, she finally broke down. Jake held her while she cried, years of fear and pain and anger coming out all at once. "It's over," she kept saying. "It's really over. It's over," Jake agreed. They returned to the ranch, and life continued. Summer turned to fall. Claire's bruises faded to nothing. The scars remained, but they didn't define her. She laughed now, truly laughed. She sang while she worked. She was healing in ways that went deeper than physical wounds. One evening in October, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Claire spoke up. "I've been thinking about staying permanently, if the offer's still open." Jake looked over at her. "It is. Not as a guest. As a partner. I have some money saved. Not much, but enough to buy into the ranch if you're willing. We could expand the operation. Maybe get some cattle to go with the horses. You want to be a rancher? I want to build something that matters. Something that can't be taken away by men with guns and bad intentions. I think we could do that together. Jake considered this. He'd been alone for 3 years, ever since his family died. He'd gotten used to the solitude, even found comfort in it. But lately the ranch had felt less lonely with Claire there, less empty. Equal partners, he asked. Equal partners? They shook on it. Claire's hand was small in his, but her grip was firm. That winter was the coldest anyone in the territory could remember. Snow piled up 6 feet deep in places. The work was brutal, keeping the animals fed and the water from freezing. But Jake and Claire managed it together. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire in the main house. Claire had made a proper dinner, roast chicken with all the fixings. They'd even found a small tree and decorated it with whatever they could fashion from scraps. "This is the first Christmas I felt safe in years," Claire said quietly. "Safe how? Like I don't have to look over my shoulder. Like tomorrow isn't something to fear. Like maybe there's actually a future worth planning for." Jake poked at the fire, sending up sparks. "When I found you that day, I thought I was just saving a life. Didn't realize I was getting a partner. Is that what I am? Just a partner?" The question hung in the air between them. Jake set down the poker and looked at Claire, really looked at her. She'd changed so much from the broken woman he'd found bleeding in the dirt. She was strong now, confident, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with her appearance and everything to do with her spirit. "No," he said honestly, "you're more than that. If I'm being truthful, you've been more than that for a while now." Claire moved closer to him on the couch. "I was hoping you'd say that." She kissed him. It was gentle, tentative, like she wasn't quite sure if it was allowed. Jake kissed her back, one hand coming up to cup her cheek. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I love you, Jake Monroe," Claire said. "I think I have since that first day when you promised I'd never be hurt again. You kept that promise. You gave me my life back." "I love you too," Jake replied. "You gave me something to fight for again, something to believe in." They sat together by the fire as the snow fell outside, planning their future. They'd expand the ranch in spring, maybe build a bigger house.
Start a real life together.
The next morning, Christmas Day, Jake woke to find Claire already up and dressed. She had coffee brewing and was staring out the window at something. "What is it?" he asked, joining her. She pointed. In the distance, a lone rider was approaching the ranch. Even from far away, Jake could see the marshal's badge glinting in the winter sunlight. Marshal Grant rode up to the house and dismounted. Her face was grim. "Merry Christmas, Marshal," Jake said warily. "What brings you out here in this weather?" "Wish it was a social call. We got problems." Carl escaped. The words hit Jake like a punch to the gut. "How?" His lawyer arranged a transfer to a different prison, said there was some irregularity with the trial that required review. It was all legal and proper on paper, but the wagon carrying him never made it to its destination. Guards were found dead, Carl and 2 other prisoners gone. Claire had gone pale. "When did this happen?" 3 days ago. I came as soon as I heard." Carl's got nothing to lose now. He's already sentenced to hang. But I figured before they catch him again, he might want to settle some scores. Jake felt ice in his veins. "You think he'll come here?" "I think it's a possibility you need to prepare for. Carl's a lot of things, but he ain't subtle. He made it clear during the trial that he blamed Miss Dawson for everything, said she ruined his life." "She didn't ruin anything," Jake said harshly. "He did that to himself." "I agree. But that doesn't change the danger."
Marshal Grant looked at Claire.
"I can take you somewhere safe. Hide you until Carl's caught." "No," Claire said firmly. "I'm not running anymore. This is my home. Our home. If Carl wants to come here, let him come. We'll be ready." Marshal Grant looked at Jake. "That how you feel too?" "It is," the marshal sighed. "Figured you'd say that. All right. Then we prepare. I'll stay here with you until this is resolved. I've also sent word to the sheriff in Copper Falls, crooked as he may be. Carl's escape is federal business now. There'll be pauses out looking for him all over the territory. They spent the day fortifying the ranch. Jake and Marshal Grant checked every approach, every sightline. They positioned rifles at strategic windows, stocked ammunition, made sure the horses were ready in case they needed to ride out fast. Claire insisted on helping, despite both Jake and the marshal trying to convince her to stay inside. She knew how to shoot, and she wanted to contribute. Jake finally agreed, giving her his spare pistol and making sure she remembered how to use it. Night fell, and they took shifts keeping watch. Jake took first watch, sitting in the darkness with his rifle across his knees. The ranch was quiet except for the wind and the occasional sound from the animals in the barn. Around midnight, the dogs started barking. Low warning barks that meant something was out there. Jake tensed and moved to wake the others. They assembled in the main room, weapons ready. The barking got louder, more insistent. Then it stopped abruptly. That was worse than the noise. "He's here," Claire whispered. "Could be coyotes," Marshal Grant said.
But she didn't sound convinced. A window shattered in the back bedroom.
Then another in the kitchen. Objects came flying through, trailing fire. Bottles filled with kerosene and stuffed with burning rags. Crude but effective. The curtains caught immediately. Fire spread across the wooden floor. Jake and Marshal Grant rushed to put it out, but more bottles came through other windows. The house was burning. "We have to get out!" Jake shouted over the roar of the flames. They ran for the front door. It burst open before they reached it, and men poured in. Not Carl's gang. Different men, hired guns. There were at least 6 of them. Gunfire erupted in the confined space. Jake shot 2 men before they could aim. Marshal Grant dropped another. But there were too many, and the fire was spreading fast. Smoke filled the room, choking and blinding. "The back!" Claire screamed. They fought their way toward the back door, shooting as they went. Jake felt a bullet graze his arm, but kept moving. They burst out into the cold night air and ran for the barn. More gunshots. These came from outside, from men positioned around the ranch. Carl had brought an army. He'd planned this carefully. They made it to the barn and barricaded the door. Inside, the horses were panicking from the gunfire and smoke. Jake calmed them as best he could while Marshal Grant reloaded her weapons. "How many you think?" the marshal asked. 10, maybe 12. Professional killers by the look of them. Carl's spending his money. Where is he, though? Carl wouldn't miss this. As if in answer, Carl's voice rang out across the ranch yard. "Jake Monroe! You in that barn? You and that girl and whoever else is foolish enough to stand with you?" Jake moved to a crack in the barn wall and peered out. Carl stood in the open, backlit by the burning house. He looked thinner than before, harder. Prison hadn't been kind to him. "It's over, Carl!" Jake shouted back. "You're just making it worse." "Worse? They already want to hang me." "Can't get much worse than that, but I can make sure you and that girl pay before they catch me." "The marshal's here."
"More law will come. You'll die here."
Carl laughed. "Maybe, but you'll die first. And that girl who ruined everything, she'll die worst of all. I'm going to make sure she knows pain like she's never felt before." Claire stood up from where she'd been crouching. "I'm not afraid of you anymore, Carl." "You should be." Carl gestured, and his hired guns opened fire on the barn. Bullets punched through the wooden walls. The horses screamed and reared. One bullet passed close enough to Claire that she felt the wind of it. They couldn't stay here. The barn offered some protection, but it was made of wood and straw. One fire bottle, and they'd burn just like the house. "We need to break out," Jake said. "Get to the horses and ride." "They'll shoot us down," Marshal Grant said. "Maybe. But it's better than burning alive." They saddled 3 horses quickly while bullets continued to pepper the barn. Jake's plan was simple. They'd burst out the barn's back door, the one facing away from most of the shooters, and ride hard for the tree line about 200 yards away. Once in the trees, they'd have cover and could try to lose their pursuers in the darkness. It wasn't a great plan, but it was all they had. On my count," Jake said, positioning himself to throw open the back door. 1, 2, 3. He threw the door open and they rode out at full gallop. Immediately, gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Jake felt his horse stumble, but it kept running. Marshal Grant fired back at the muzzle flashes as they rode. They were 50 yards from the barn when Marshal Grant's horse went down, shot through the chest. The marshal hit the ground hard and didn't move. Jake pulled up his horse. "Keep going," he shouted at Claire. "Don't stop. I'm not leaving you." Jake swung down from his horse and ran back to the fallen marshal. She was alive but unconscious, blood running from a gash on her head. He grabbed her under the arms and started dragging her toward cover. Claire rode up beside him, extending her hand. "Get her on my horse." "Hurry!" Together they managed to lift the marshal's limp body onto the horse in front of Claire. Bullets kicked up dirt all around them. Jake's own horse had run off, spooked by the gunfire. "Go," Jake shouted. "Get her to safety." "What about you?" "I'll be right behind you. Go." Claire hesitated one more second, then kicked her horse forward. Jake turned and ran for the nearest cover, a water trough about 20 feet away. He slid behind it just as bullets chewed up the ground where he'd been standing. He was pinned down. Carl's men were closing in from 3 sides. His rifle was empty and he only had his pistol with maybe 8 rounds left. Not enough. Through the chaos, he heard Carl's voice again. "Where's the girl?" "Where'd she go?" "Doesn't matter," one of the hired guns shouted back. "We got Monroe." "He's trapped." "Then kill him. Kill him now and let's go find that girl." 6 men were advancing on his position in a loose line. They had him. He could maybe take 2 of them down before they got him. Not good odds. Then a gunshot rang out from a completely different direction. One of the advancing men dropped. Then another shot. Another man down. Claire. She hadn't run. She'd circled around and was shooting from the tree line. The hired guns scattered, looking for this new threat. Jake seized the moment. He broke from cover and ran toward the burning house. It was counterintuitive, but the flames gave off so much light that the darkness beyond them was deeper. He could use that. He made it around the side of the house just as it started to collapse. The heat was incredible. But he'd gained precious yards and some cover. He moved through the shadows, working his way toward where Carl had been standing. The gang leader was still there, directing his men like a general. He had a rifle in his hands now and was trying to spot Claire in the trees. He didn't see Jake coming until it was too late. Jake hit Carl from behind, driving his shoulder into the man's lower back and taking him to the ground. The rifle went flying. They rolled in the dirt, fighting for position. Carl was weaker from his injury and time in prison, but he fought with desperate strength. They came up facing each other, both on their knees. Carl's hand flashed out with a knife Jake hadn't seen. The blade cut across Jake's chest, shallow but painful. Jake caught Carl's wrist and they struggled. "You should have just let her die," Carl hissed. "None of this would have happened. She deserved to live, more than you ever did." Jake twisted Carl's wrist and the knife fell. He drove his fist into Carl's face once, twice, 3 times. The outlaw's head snapped back and he crumpled. But the fight wasn't over. Carl's hired guns had spotted them. Jake saw them turning, bringing their weapons to bear. He grabbed Carl's dropped rifle and fired from his knees, working the lever action as fast as he could. He hit one man, then another. But there were still 4 more, and his rifle clicked empty. This was it.
He'd run out of luck.
Then the night exploded with gunfire from multiple directions. New shooters coming from the road. Jake hit the dirt and covered his head as bullets flew overhead. When the shooting stopped, he looked up. 4 men on horseback, all wearing deputy badges. Behind them, more riders. A whole posse led by a face Jake recognized. The sheriff from Copper Falls, corrupt as he supposedly was, had brought help. The surviving hired guns threw down their weapons and raised their hands. It was over. Jake stood slowly, his chest bleeding and his whole body aching. Claire ran to him from the trees and threw her arms around him. He held her tight, hardly believing they both survived. "The marshal?" he asked, alive.
"Conscious now."
"She's with the deputies." The sheriff rode up and dismounted. He looked at the burning house, the dead bodies, Carl unconscious in the dirt. "Hell of a mess you got here, Monroe," the sheriff said. "Not by choice." The sheriff nodded. "I know. Grant sent word about Carl's escape. We organized the posse and rode hard. Looks like we got here just in time." "Why?" Jake asked. "Word is you're on Carl's payroll." "Was," the sheriff corrected. Past tense. "He paid me to look the other way when his gang operated in my territory. But escaped prisoners and trying to burn down a law-abiding rancher? That crosses a line. Besides, that federal warrant on him means there's reward money. More than Carl ever paid me. Not the heroic motive Jake might have hoped for, but he'd take it. Results mattered more than reasons right now." Carl was shackled and loaded onto a horse. The dead were counted. 8 of Carl's hired guns killed, 3 captured. None of the posse or Jake's people had died, though several were injured, including Marshal Grant. As dawn broke over the ruined ranch, Jake and Claire stood together surveying the damage. The house was gone, just smoking ruins. The barn had some bullet holes but was intact. Most of the animals had survived.
"We can rebuild," Claire said quietly.
"We can. Stronger." Jake put his arm around her shoulders. "Definitely stronger." Marshal Grant limped over, her head bandaged but her eyes clear. "You two all right?" she asked. "That's something. More than something. That's everything." She looked at the ruins of the house. "Sorry about your home." "It's just wood and nails. Sadder. We're still here. That's what matters." The marshal smiled. "You're a good man, Monroe." World needs more like you. She turned to Claire. And you, Miss Dawson. You've got more courage than most men I know. What you did tonight, circling around to provide cover fire, that saved lives. Claire ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise. I just did what needed doing. That's the definition of courage. The posse stayed long enough to help bury the dead and secure the prisoners. Carl was taken back to Copper Falls under heavy guard. This time there wouldn't be any convenient escapes. The federal government was taking direct custody. As the posse prepared to leave, the sheriff approached Jake and Claire one more time. For what it's worth, I'm done with the corruption, he said. Grant's been after me to clean up my act for years. Guess almost getting people killed was the wake-up call I needed. I'm going to do the job right from now on. See that you do, Jake said. There are enough bad men in this territory without the law being part of the problem. The sheriff nodded and rode out with his men, Carl and the other prisoners in tow. Marshal Grant stayed one more day to make sure everything was settled, then she too had to leave. You know where to find me if you need anything, she told them before mounting her horse. Thank you, Marshal, Claire said, for everything. Thank you, both of you. You reminded me why I took this job in the first place, to protect people like you from people like Carl. She rode off, and Jake and Claire were finally alone. They stood in the yard looking at what remained of their home and their dreams. It's going to take months to rebuild, Claire said. Probably a year, actually. We need to do it right this time. Can we afford it? The ranch hasn't turned a profit yet. Jake was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he smiled. You know what? I don't care. We'll make it work. We've survived worse than financial problems. Claire laughed, and it was the most beautiful sound Jake had ever heard. Pure and genuine, with no shadow of fear or pain. We have, haven't we? Survived worse, I mean. Much worse. They spent that day salvaging what they could from the ruins. Most of the house was gone, but the root cellar had survived and held their food stores. Jake's tools in the barn were intact. They had the horses and enough money saved to buy supplies. That night they slept in the barn, wrapped in blankets on a bed of fresh hay. It wasn't comfortable, but they were together and they were alive. That was enough. In the weeks that followed, word spread about what happened at Jake's ranch. People came from all over to help rebuild. Some owed Jake favors. Others just wanted to help a man who'd stood up to outlaws. The community rallied together in a way Jake hadn't experienced since his family died. A new house went up, bigger and better than the old one. Claire designed it herself, with wide windows that let in plenty of light and a porch that wrapped around 3 sides. It was beautiful. By spring, the ranch was not only rebuilt but improved. They'd expanded the corrals and added a second barn. Claire's business sense, combined with Jake's hard work, made the operation more efficient than ever. The cattle they'd bought before the attack had survived and were thriving. They sold half the herd at market for a good profit and kept the rest for breeding. On a warm day in May, almost exactly a year after Jake had found Claire dying in that creek bed, they stood together on their new porch watching the sunset. I've been thinking, Claire said. About what? About getting married. If you want to, I mean. We're already partners in the ranch. Might as well make it official in other ways, too. Jake turned to look at her. She was smiling, but there was nervousness in her eyes, like she wasn't quite sure what his answer would be. Is that a proposal? He asked. I suppose it is. I know it's not traditional for the woman to ask, but I'm not a very traditional woman. No, you're not. You're much better than traditional. He took her hand in his. Yes, Claire Dawson. I'll marry you. She kissed him there on the porch as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and gold. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. When? Claire asked. Soon. This summer. We'll have the ceremony right here on the ranch. And invite everyone who helped us rebuild? Everyone. The wedding took place in July. Marshal Grant came and served as Claire's witness. The corrupt No More sheriff from Copper Falls came too, bringing a nice set of dishes as a gift. People from 3 counties showed up to celebrate. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Jake wore his best suit, and Claire wore a dress she'd made herself, white with blue trim. They exchanged vows under a tree that Jake's father had planted 40 years ago, the only thing that remained from his childhood home. At the reception, people danced and ate and celebrated late into the night. Jake and Claire stood together watching their friends and neighbors enjoy themselves. We did it, Claire said. We actually built something good out of all that pain and fear. We did, Jake agreed. And this is just the beginning. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I love you, Jake Monroe. I love you too, Claire Monroe. The name felt right, like it had always been meant to be that way. Years passed. The ranch prospered. Jake and Claire had 2 children, a boy and a girl. They raised them to be strong and kind and brave. The kids grew up hearing the story of how their parents met, how Jake had saved Claire and Claire had saved Jake right back. Carl died in prison 5 years after his final arrest. Marshal Grant sent word when it happened. Jake felt nothing but relief. One less monster in the world. The ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where people could find honest work and fair treatment. Jake and Claire employed dozens of hands over the years. Some stayed for seasons, others for years. All of them were treated with respect and paid fairly. Claire never forgot what it felt like to be beaten and abandoned.
She made sure that any woman or person in trouble who showed up at their ranch found help and shelter. The guest room was rarely empty.
There was always someone healing, regaining their strength, preparing to start over. Jake supported her in this completely. He understood that saving that one life all those years ago had changed him. It had given him purpose beyond just surviving. He'd found his calling as a protector, a guardian for those who couldn't protect themselves. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they sat on the porch swing they'd installed years before. The sun was setting, painting the sky in familiar shades of orange and gold. Their children were inside, supposedly sleeping, but probably still awake and whispering to each other.
"Do you ever regret it?" Claire asked.
Everything that happened. The violence. Almost dying. If you'd just ridden past me that day, your life would have been so much simpler. Jake didn't have to think about his answer. Not for a second. Finding you was the best thing that ever happened to me. Everything since then, all of this, it's only possible because of that day. Even having the house burned down? Even that. We built something better from the ashes. Claire nestled closer to him. I think about sometimes what would have happened if you hadn't found me, if you'd been riding a different trail that day. I would have died in that creek bed. Alone. Forgotten. But I did find you. And you're not forgotten. You're loved. By me. By our children. By everyone whose life you've touched. She was quiet for a moment. You kept your promise, you know. You said I'd never be hurt again. And I haven't been. Not really. Oh, there have been hard times and challenges. But hurt like that? The kind that comes from cruelty and hatred? Oh, never again. You made sure of that. We made sure of that, Jake corrected. You're the one who insisted on fighting instead of running. You're the one who stood her ground when Carl came back. This life we built, it's as much your doing as mine. The sky darkened and stars began to appear. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. The ranch settled into its nightly quiet, peaceful, and secure. Jake and Claire sat together on that porch swing, watching the stars come out one by one, planning for tomorrow and all the tomorrows after that. They'd survived the worst the world could throw at them and come out stronger on the other side, and they knew, deep in their bones, that whatever challenges came next, they'd face them together. Just like they always had. Just like they always would. Because some promises once made are kept forever.